He had lost his home, his family, and his purpose after the war, but when he saw 5 gang members corner an elderly man in a dark alley, something inside him snapped. What this homeless veteran did next shocked the entire city. Welcome to Stories of Black Lives. Before we dive into these powerful stories of respect, justice, and hope, please let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and your age. If you'd like to see more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. And please don't forget to like our video. It was a cold February night in Detroit. The snow had just stopped falling, and the streets looked wet and slippery. Icy wind blew mercilessly between the old buildings. It was 11 p.m., and while most people were preparing to sleep in the warmth and safety of their homes, Thomas Washington sat on pieces of cardboard outside an old store's entrance. He wore what used to be a dark green military jacket, now faded from wear and time. On the left sleeve, there was still a visible old patch, 82nd Airborne Division. On his feet were worn-out sneakers full of holes, and beside him sat a torn backpack containing everything he owned. Inside were just a few pieces of clothing, a plastic water bottle, an old blanket, and one photograph. That photograph was the most precious thing he owned. 49-year-old Thomas had been living on Detroit streets for 3 years. His hair had gone prematurely gray, deep lines had formed on his face, and his eyes had lost the spark of hope they once held. But people only saw his dirty clothes and unkempt beard. They didn't know his real story. To them, he was just Crazy Tom, who sat on the corner. The strange man who talked to himself and sometimes trembled for no apparent reason. No one knew he was actually a hero, that he had fought for his country, that he had protected his comrades. Thomas's story began 12 years ago on the dusty hills of Afghanistan. There, Sergeant Thomas Washington was one of the most trusted leaders of the 82nd Airborne Division Alpha Company. He loved his soldiers, and they loved him. They called him Sergeant Tom because they knew he would always have their backs. Thomas wasn't just a superior giving orders. He was like a big brother to them. During night watches, he would chat with them about their families back home. Young soldiers would show him their photographs and read him letters. Thomas would talk about his wife Janet back in Detroit and his little daughter Maya. For 3 tours, he completed the most dangerous missions under enemy fire, sending his comrades home safely. He fought everywhere from Kandahar to Helmand. Bomb attacks, ambushes, night operations. He was always on the front lines. He would risk his life to protect his soldiers. "We leave no one behind," he would say. "We all go together. We all come back together." But on his 4th tour, on March 15, 2016, everything changed. Thomas would never forget that day. Their convoy had gone out for a routine patrol mission outside Kabul. The road was familiar. They had traveled it hundreds of times. Thomas was in the second vehicle with his friends Mike, Carlos, and young soldier Danny. Danny was only 20 years old, from Ohio. He had a girlfriend back home and was planning to propose to her. Thomas had taken him under his wing, knowing how much he looked forward to going home. The explosion was so sudden that Thomas didn't understand what happened. A tremendous noise, then smoke and dust everywhere. His ears were ringing, he couldn't see. There was a taste of blood in his mouth. Slowly, he regained consciousness. The vehicle had flipped over. With trembling hands, he undid his seatbelt and tried to get out. "Mike, Carlos, Danny," he shouted. No answer came. He found Mike first. No pulse. Carlos was breathing, but his eyes were open, staring blankly. When Thomas found Danny, his world collapsed. The young soldier was still alive, but severely wounded. "Sergeant," he whispered, "will I be able to get home?" Thomas held his hand. "Of course you will, son. You're going to propose to Sarah, remember?" Danny smiled and closed his eyes. He never opened them again. Thomas survived, but his soul remained there. He lost 3 friends in that convoy. All 3 were under his responsibility. All 3 had dreamed of going home. Thomas blamed himself. "Why did I survive?" he constantly asked. "Why not them?" When he returned home, he was diagnosed with PTSD, but that was just a medical term. What he actually experienced was much more complex. He couldn't sleep at night and had nightmares during the day. Sudden sounds made him jump. Crowded places caused panic attacks. Worst of all, he saw the ghosts of his friends. Mike, Carlos, and Danny followed him. He talked to them, tried to explain to them. His wife Janet tried to understand. She really tried. In their Detroit home, she arranged a room for Thomas, reminded him to take his medications, and took him to doctor appointments. But Thomas was no longer the same. He had become silent and withdrawn. He would wake up at night sweating and screaming. When Janet tried to wake him, Thomas would attack her, thinking she was the enemy. When his little daughter Maya tried to hug her father, Thomas would tense up, because every hug took him back to that explosion moment. Every child's laughter reminded him of Danny's last smile. The medications didn't work. Antidepressants made him feel like a zombie. Sleeping pills weren't enough against the nightmares. Therapy sessions didn't help either. The doctor told him to leave the past behind, but Thomas couldn't escape the past. His friends were everywhere, on TV, in the mirror, in his dreams, in his sleepless nights. Alcohol seemed like a temporary solution. When he drank, the voices stopped. He could endure the nightmares. But when morning came, everything was worse. Shame, guilt, and physical pain combined, making Thomas drink more. The vicious cycle had begun. One day, Janet couldn't take it anymore. Thomas was sitting in the kitchen, drinking straight from the bottle. Maya was at school. Janet had come home early from work. When she saw Thomas in that state, her heart broke. "Thomas," she said through tears, "I don't recognize you anymore. You're not the man I married." That Thomas was strong, protective, he loved us. You're just a ghost. Thomas looked at her, his eyes blurry. "I died, Janet. I died in that car with them. You're married to a ghost. Maya is scared of you too. You should have seen how I calmed her down last night when you screamed. She keeps asking, will Daddy be okay? I don't know what to answer." Thomas put his head in his hands. "I'm sorry, Janet. I'm so sorry. Being sorry isn't enough, Thomas. I want you to get help. Real help. Otherwise, maybe we need to take a break." That break never ended. Thomas started drinking more. He stopped going to work. He wouldn't leave the house for days. Janet didn't know what to do. One day when she came home, she found Thomas unconscious on the floor. They took him to the hospital, pumped his stomach. The doctor told Janet that, if he continues, he will die. But Thomas continued. Janet now had to protect Maya. She met with a lawyer and filed for divorce. Thomas didn't object. "You're right," he said. "I can't be a husband or father anymore. You deserve better." The divorce papers came, followed by an eviction notice. Janet moved into the house with her brother and mother. Thomas found himself on the street with only a few belongings and his military honor medals. But those medals didn't satisfy his hunger or reduce the pain he felt. The first year was the hardest. He tried staying in shelters, but the crowds bothered him. Every sound, every sudden movement took him back to the battlefield. In the middle of the night, when he woke up, he would think the person sleeping next to him was an enemy and prepare to attack. Shelter workers labeled him as dangerous and no longer accepted him. The streets were quieter, felt safer. He stayed under bridges, in abandoned buildings, on park benches. On winter nights, he was close to freezing to death, but Thomas didn't care. Maybe dying would be better. Maybe then he would reunite with his friends. Finding food was also difficult. He rummaged through garbage cans, looked for leftover food behind fast food restaurants. Sometimes he couldn't eat anything for days. His body became weak and vulnerable to diseases. Once he got pneumonia and was taken to the hospital. The doctor told him, if he continues this lifestyle, he will die. Thomas replied that he was already dead. Over time, people began to recognize him. They called him Crazy Tom because sometimes he talked to himself, got lost in the past. No one knew he was actually talking to his lost friends. "I'm sorry, Mike," he would say. "I couldn't protect you. Danny, tell Sarah I love her. He wanted to propose, you know. Carlos, hug your family. Tell them how much you miss them." The second year, he got somewhat used to it. He learned which streets would cause trouble, what times police would come, where he could find food, which shop owners were kind-hearted. Some people gave him money, some gave food. Most just passed by, pretending he didn't exist. The third year, he had become completely invisible. People didn't look at him, didn't even sense his presence. This was actually comfortable for Thomas. No one asked questions, no one looked at him pitifully, no one told him to pull himself together. Invisibility was like a form of protection. That night, like every other night, he was outside the old shop in the Corktown neighborhood. This place was usually quiet. Not many people passed by. In the evening hours, only a few people returning from work would walk by and quickly head home. Thomas was trying to read an old book he had taken from his bag. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. The pages were yellowed, the corners worn, but it was still readable. He had given this book to Danny when they were soldiers. It's a beautiful story, he had said, about the power of friendship. After Danny died, Thomas had taken this book from his belongings. Now he read it when he felt stuck, remembering Danny. As he tried to make out the letters in the weak yellow light of the street lamp, he heard voices in the distance. At first, he didn't pay attention. Night sounds were normal in Detroit. Police sirens, car horns, people coming home late talking. The city never slept. But these voices were different. They were aggressive, angry voices. The voices began to approach, and Thomas looked up from his book. 5 young men were walking from the opposite street. They appeared to be between 20 and 25 years old. They were all dressed in dark colors, hooded sweatshirts, baggy pants, sneakers. Their hoods were pulled up, their faces in shadow. Their hands were in their pockets. But Thomas could tell with his experienced eyes that they were carrying weapons. There was aggressiveness in their walk, the expression of predatory animals looking for prey in their gaze. One of them was laughing loudly, another was cursing. The third was talking on the phone, the fourth was constantly looking around. The fifth, who appeared to be the leader, tall and broad-shouldered, was silent, but he seemed the most dangerous. Thomas recognized them. He would see them in the neighborhood from time to time. They were members of a gang known as the East Side Wolves. They sold drugs, collected protection money, and threatened people in the area. The police couldn't catch them, the courts released them. Neighborhood residents were afraid of them. Thomas had tried to stay away from them until now. Not getting involved, staying invisible was safer. Just then, an elderly man emerged from the side street. He was about 60 years old, well-dressed, wearing a clean coat. He had a leather bag in his hand and polished shoes on his feet. He had probably gotten off work late or had been visiting a friend. There was a politeness in the man's walk. It was obvious he was a respectable citizen. He was the kind of person who wouldn't harm anyone. Thomas had seen that man before. He didn't know his name, but he was a neighborhood resident. Usually in the mornings, he would say good morning to children going to school and chat with shop owners. It was obvious he was a good person. And right now, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The gang members noticed the elderly man. Thomas felt his heart racing. A tension he hadn't felt in years appeared in his body. That familiar feeling from before battle. Danger was approaching, and he could sense it. His military instincts kicked in. This was going to end badly. The leader made a signal to his group. All 5 turned toward the elderly man. They began to surround their prey like a pack of wolves. Thomas held his breath. Should he intervene? But then what would happen? 5 against 1, and in his weakened state from months of not eating properly. They might kill him. Maybe no one would even notice. But then he saw Danny's face. "Sergeant, will I be able to get home?" He heard Mike's voice. "You're our leader, Tom. You'll protect us." He remembered Carlos's laughter. He had fought for them. He had been willing to die for them. Now there was someone in front of him who needed protection, and was he just going to sit and watch? The gang members blocked the elderly man's path. "Hey, old man," said the leader, threat in his voice. "What are you doing around here at this hour?" The man stopped. Thomas saw that he immediately became tense, understanding the danger. The elderly man tried to turn back, but it was too late. The 5 young men surrounded him. There was no escape. "Let's see what's in your bag," said another, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Please," said the elderly man, his voice trembling. "I'm just going home. I don't want any trouble. I don't have anything, just my books." Thomas understood at that moment. This man was a teacher. He had books, not money, in his bag. He had stayed late at school in the evening, preparing lessons, maybe checking his students' homework. He was a person who served people like himself, who benefited society. "But we want to cause trouble," said the third one, and pushed the elderly man hard. The man stumbled and lost his balance, but didn't fall. Thomas stood up. His heart began beating even faster. His hands were trembling, but this wasn't fear. This was the first real sense of purpose he had felt in years. For 3 years, he had felt worthless and insignificant, but now there was someone in front of him who needed protection, just like he used to protect his soldiers. "Give us the bag. Make it easy on yourself," said the tall person who appeared to be the gang leader, cold threat in his voice. "There are only my books inside," said the elderly man, his voice full of desperation. "No money. I'm a retired teacher. My pension is already small." "Don't lie," shouted another, and pushed the elderly man harder this time. This time the man fell to the ground. His bag opened, and books scattered out. Math books, student papers, pencils. There really was no money. But the gang members were angry. They had wasted their time for nothing. "The old fool tricked us," said one. "Then he needs to get beaten," said another. That's when something inside Thomas exploded. Sergeant Thomas Washington came back to life. Not the homeless man on the street, but the leader who protected his comrades. The commander who safely brought his soldiers home. The memory of Danny, Mike, and Carlos strengthened him. He had fought for them. Now he would fight for this innocent man. He began walking toward them with determined steps. His steps were confident, his purpose clear. The soldier identity that had been lost for 3 years was returning. "Hey!" Thomas shouted, his voice surprisingly strong. The 5 young men turned in surprise. When they saw the dirty, bearded man in worn clothes standing before them, they laughed at first. This couldn't be real. Was homeless Crazy Tom challenging them? "What do you want, crazy?" said the leader in a mocking tone. Thomas approached. Now in the yellow light of the street lamp, they could see his eyes more clearly. And what they saw in those eyes disturbed them. These weren't crazy eyes. These were eyes that had seen much, survived on battlefields, lost friends, but never surrendered. There was no fear in these eyes, only determination. "Leave the man alone," Thomas said in a calm but determined voice. His voice wasn't trembling, wasn't hesitating. The gang members looked at each other. This was something they hadn't expected. Normally, when people saw them, they would run away, or at least try not to get involved. But this homeless man was challenging them. "Are you serious?" said another, still not believing. "Get out of here, or we'll beat you too. We can see your condition. We know how weak you are." Thomas took another step closer. Now he was 5 meters away from them. "I'm saying this for the last time," he said, his voice now completely that of a commander. "Leave the man alone. Get out of here. I won't let you harm anyone." The leader was now seriously angry. He couldn't accept this challenge. He didn't want to appear weak in front of the others. "This guy is crazy," he said, and tried to punch Thomas. But Thomas was no longer the drunk, homeless man on the street. At that moment, he was Sergeant Washington. He easily blocked the punch and at the same time kneed the leader in the stomach. The movement was so fast and professional that the gang members watched in amazement. The young man fell to the ground breathless, writhing and holding his stomach. The other 4 tried to attack, but Thomas was ready. Years of street life had physically weakened him, but military training was still in his muscle memory. And more importantly, he had purpose again inside him. An innocent to protect, a value to defend. He grabbed the second one by the shoulder and with a quick movement slammed him against the wall. He elbowed the third one in the side. The young man collapsed to the ground, unable to breathe. The 4th one started to run away in fear, but the 5th one tried to attack from behind with a knife. "Thomas, watch out," shouted the elderly man. Thomas turned and saw the knife in the last attacker's hand. This time it was more dangerous, but Thomas didn't panic. He had faced more dangerous situations on the battlefield. He grabbed the young man's wrist and twisted it in reverse. The knife fell to the ground in pain. Then he neutralized him like the others. The entire fight lasted only 15 seconds. 5 gang members lay on the ground, trying to breathe, their wounds aching. Thomas stood upright, breathing heavily but uninjured. Inside him was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of accomplishment. He had protected someone, done the right thing. The elderly man slowly stood up and straightened his clothes. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "You saved my life. God knows what they would have done to me." Thomas looked at him. The fear had passed from the man's eyes. Now there was admiration. "Are you okay? Are you injured?" "Yes, just a little shaken." "But you? How did you? I mean, how could you?" The man couldn't complete his sentence. "I used to be a soldier," Thomas said simply, as if that explained everything. The elderly man understood. Before him stood not just a homeless man, but a hero who had fought for his country. "Vietnam?" he asked respectfully. "Afghanistan. For tours." The man bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you. Really, thank you. You served this country, and now you protected me." Thomas shrugged. "It was nothing. I did the right thing." The elderly man began gathering his belongings. Books were scattered on the ground. Some pages were torn. But the man didn't care. Being alive was enough. Thomas helped him, carefully placing the books in the bag. "Are you a math teacher?" Thomas asked. "I'm retired. I taught for 40 years in this neighborhood. Now I volunteer at the school, helping students." Thomas smiled. For the first time in years, it was a real smile. Good work. The children need you. As the man placed the last book, he stopped and looked at Thomas. What's your name? Thomas. Thomas Washington. I'm Harold. Harold Jenkins. He took out a business card from his pocket. Call me tomorrow. I want to tell you something. Thomas took the card but didn't say anything. Harold turned to leave but stopped once more. Thomas, he said in a serious tone. Do you know you're a hero? Thomas shook his head. No. Heroes don't die. I should have died. Harold's face contorted with pain. He understood how much this man was suffering. No, Thomas. Heroes live, and they protect others, just like you did tonight. Harold left. The gang members had also recovered and fled. Thomas sat back down in his place, but now everything was different. The emptiness inside him seemed somewhat filled. There was something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of worth. He didn't sleep the rest of that night. He kept turning the business card in his hand, thinking about Harold's words. Do you know you're a hero? Danny, Mike, and Carlos's ghosts didn't visit him that night. Maybe they were finally at peace. Maybe they had seen Thomas protect someone else and were proud. The next morning, Thomas called the number on the business card. The phone didn't ring for long. Hello. Harold's voice was tired but joyful. This is Thomas. From last night. Thomas. I'm so glad. Can you come? There's someone you need to meet. I don't know, Harold. I'm just a homeless person. No, Thomas. You're much more than that. Please come. Just 1 hour. Thomas agreed. He got Harold's address and decided to walk there. As he walked around the neighborhood, he noticed people looked at him differently. Word of last night's incident had spread quickly. Some nodded at him respectfully, some thanked him. Thank you, said an elderly lady. Those kids scare everyone. You told them to stop. It was nothing, Thomas said humbly. Harold's house was in a respectable part of the neighborhood. A 2-story, white-painted house with a small garden in front. When Thomas came to the door, he hesitated. How long had it been since he had entered such a house? Maybe he wouldn't be accepted. When Harold opened the door, he was smiling. Thomas, welcome. When they went inside, Thomas was surprised. The house was very clean, warm, and full of books. Diplomas, photographs, and thank you letters from students hung on the walls. This was an educator's home. Sit down, Thomas. Would you like coffee? Yes, thank you. While Harold went to the kitchen, Thomas looked around. He hadn't been in such a normal, peaceful environment for so long. He felt a strange warmth in his heart. Harold returned with coffee. Thomas, he said, sitting down. I can't forget what you did last night. But it wasn't just physical courage. You did the right thing. Most people would have run away in that situation. You intervened. Thomas lowered his head. I just did the right thing. Protecting someone else, this isn't new for me. Were you like this in Afghanistan too? Thomas's eyes misted over. I protected my soldiers. They were my responsibility. But I failed. I lost 3 of them. Harold nodded understandingly. That's why you live on the street. When I returned home, everything was different. My wife, my daughter. I lost them too. Because I wasn't the same anymore. Thomas, I'm going to tell you something. I was in Vietnam for 4 years. Thomas looked in surprise. You're a veteran too? Yes. 1968 to 1972. I also experienced PTSD. I also lost everything. I divorced my first wife, started drinking, lost my job. But now you're a teacher. Now I am. Because someone helped me. Someone gave me a second chance. I found my life's purpose, educating children. Thomas listened quietly. And last night, Harold continued, you found your purpose too, protecting others. This is your nature, Thomas. You forgot it, but it wasn't lost. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Harold stood up. Ah, he's here. A middle-aged man in a suit entered. He was black, handsome, and confident. Thomas, this is Marcus Reed. Former police officer, now runs a private security company. Marcus shook hands with Thomas. Harold told me about last night's incident. Very impressive. It wasn't anything special, Thomas said uncomfortably. Harold told me you have a military background. Which unit were you in? 82nd Airborne Division. Marcus's face lit up. Are you serious? I was in the Army too. 3rd Infantry Division. I was in Iraq from 2003 to 2007. I was in Afghanistan 2008 to 2015. Brother, Marcus said enthusiastically. But why are you living on the streets? Thomas told his story. The PTSD, alcohol addiction, divorce, everything. Marcus listened carefully, never judging. Thomas, Marcus said, I want to offer you a job. What kind of job? Security. Private security. You know the streets. You can read people. You can sense danger. And last night you proved you can take action when necessary. Thomas was surprised. But I've been on the streets for 3 years. I don't know if I can handle regular work. Sometimes I lose control. That's normal, Thomas. I experienced it too. But with the right help, the right support system, you can overcome it. Harold interjected. Thomas, I talked to you. I want to help with housing. I have an apartment building. There's an empty unit. You can stay there for a few months. Thomas couldn't believe it. Why? Why are you helping me? Because last night you helped me, Harold said. And because everyone deserves a second chance. And because you served your country, Marcus said. This should never be forgotten. It's shameful that people like you live on the streets. Thomas felt his eyes welling up. For the first time in 3 years, he felt that someone valued him, cared about him. But I'm not ready, Thomas said. I still have nightmares. I still see my friends. We all have nightmares, Thomas, Marcus said. But we learn to deal with them. We'll find you a therapist. We'll find you a doctor. But most importantly, we'll find you a purpose. A month later, Thomas started his new job. First, he worked as a security guard in small apartment buildings. He wore clean clothes, ate regular meals, and stayed in the small apartment Harold had found. He took his medications and went to therapy twice a week. His PTSD was still there, but now he was learning to fight it. In therapy sessions, he talked about his friends' deaths and tried to resolve his guilt feelings. The doctor explained to him that surviving wasn't a crime. Marcus gave him special training: conflict resolution, security protocols, first aid, crisis management. Thomas learned everything quickly because now he had a purpose: to protect people, to keep them safe. The first months were difficult. Sometimes he had panic attacks at work. Sometimes he couldn't sleep at night. But Marcus and Harold supported him. Don't give up, Marcus said. You're strong. We always knew that. 6 months later, Thomas was managing his own security team. Most of his employees were former soldiers, former police officers, people seeking second chances. Thomas led them, just like he had done in Afghanistan. But this time, he wasn't losing anyone. This time he was keeping everyone safe. A year later, the story appeared in the local newspaper. From homeless veteran to security company partner. Thomas's story spread throughout the city. Many homeless veterans reached out to him. Thomas began helping them too. He started a project called the Second Chance Program. 2 years later, Thomas was walking with Harold on the old street. Thomas still stopped at the same corner. I used to sit here, he said. The night you came out from there. Harold smiled. Was it by chance, I wonder? Maybe, Thomas said. But maybe everything has a reason. Definitely, Harold said. That night you didn't just save me, Thomas. You saved yourself too. Thomas nodded. He was right. That night, when he had lost himself, by saving someone else, he had found himself. Harold, Thomas said, I never thanked you. For what? For giving me a second chance. For seeing me as human. Harold touched his shoulder. Thomas, you were always human. I just helped you remember. 3 years later, Thomas Washington was co-owner of one of Detroit's largest security companies. The company was named Guardian Angel Security. 90% of his employees were former soldiers, former police officers, or people seeking second chances. 3 photographs hung on the wall of Thomas's office. The first showed his friends from Afghanistan, Danny, Mike, and Carlos. He no longer saw their ghosts because he honored them in a dignified way. The second photograph showed all the people whose lives had changed after that night: Harold, Marcus, and dozens of veterans Thomas had helped. The third photograph showed his ex-wife Janet and his daughter Maya. Yes, he had reconciled with them too. 2 years ago, Janet had reached out to him. She had heard about Thomas's transformation and wanted to give him a second chance. Now he saw Maya on weekends. His daughter called him my hero dad. Thomas told her, anyone can be a hero. You just have to wait for the right moment. He had a story he told every new employee at the company. Sometimes life knocks you down. You lose everything you're going to lose. You feel helpless, worthless. I stayed down for 3 years. But one night, I stood up to protect someone else. That moment changed my life. Because I realized that being strong isn't about standing up for yourself, but being able to stand up for others. Harold was still Thomas's closest friend. They ate together once a week and talked about the old days. Thomas never called him a life-saving angel, but Harold knew what that meant. Marcus had also become a partner in the company. Together, they had found jobs for hundreds of people and touched thousands of lives. Guardian Angel wasn't just a security company, it was a second chance factory. And on that old street, where Thomas used to sit, there was now a small monument. It read, "Sometimes heroes emerge from unexpected places." On this corner one night, a man protected another man, and both were saved. With respect to all veterans. Thomas would now stop and read the monument when he passed that street. He would smile, because he knew that the most important moment in life is when you decide to fight not for yourself, but for others. Danny, Mike, and Carlos were now at peace. Because Thomas was carrying on their legacy, protecting others, doing what's right, never giving up. This story reminds us that everyone has a story. The homeless man you see on the street might be a hero. The woman cleaning might be a genius. The child standing quietly in the corner might be a miracle. Think twice before judging. Because you don't know, maybe they are the person who will change your life. If this story inspired you, look more carefully at the people around you. Maybe you can be someone's second chance. Maybe that person can be your second chance. Because life's greatest miracles happen through the value we give each other.